The polls have been closed for about an hour now, and results are finalized for Michigan's primary election.
Tonight, we will learn which Republican candidate will move on to face Governor Gretchen Whitmer in the November general election. This is special election night coverage on 13+. I'm Juliette Dragus.
And I'm Val Lego. We have crews all over West Michigan covering tonight's primary. And of course, the biggest race is the governor's race.
We are getting a first look at some of the results as they come in. As you can see, this is the governor's race. Tudor Dixon, who has been ahead in the polls, is leading right now with 43% of the vote. This is just a small number of results as they are coming in, but we're starting to see them trickle in as well.
And recent polls are showing Tudor Dixon with that strong lead over the other candidates, as many had predicted, and she had been endorsed by Trump.
Dixon is hosting a watch party in downtown Grand Rapids at the Amway Grand, which is where we find our Charlie Tinker. Charlie?
Hey guys, I want you to take a look over the railing and see what we're seeing. We just heard some cheers erupt as they read off some of those early returns you just mentioned, which do echo some of the latest polls. They showed Tudor Dixon with a double-digit lead over her closest rivals. That does appear to be materializing, at least thus far, and you can certainly feel that in the air tonight here in Grand Rapids, where the party is now jam-packed. Still a sea of media over there as well. The folks in this room certainly predicting a Dixon win when all is said and done. Take a listen to this. We caught up to a supporter who laid out some of the reasoning behind his prediction.
If you don't have professional jobs, skilled trades, and a business-friendly state, you know what happens? Your state dies. So you get people graduated, U of M, Michigan State, what do? They leave our country, they leave our state, they go to a different state. So you get a PhD in nuclear physics, there's something here. Tudor wants to change that. And with what I've seen her been doing, how she understands her issues, she'll be the one to do it.
Yeah, that should tell you something about the level of confidence heading into this evening, with Dixon considered by many to be the front runner at this stage of the race. Potentially a bit of an edge over her once crowded field of rivals among the Republican base. Remember, there were 10 candidates at one point. And you remember last week, Dixon got that coveted nod from former President Trump, no doubt hoping that helps make up some minds, make her the nominee, and later to a face-off against Governor Whitmer in November. Only time will tell. You just read off those margins. As we pointed out, polls have shown a large group of Republican voters who are still undecided heading into the primary. So we will see where those materialize as the night goes on. And of course, we will have a much better idea of things, where things stand, in just about the next half an hour to an hour. We will continue to monitor the situation for you here in Grand Rapids. For now, we're live at the Amway Grand. Charlie Tinker, 13 on your side.
Thank you, Charlie.
And while we wait for more results to come in, we want to bring in an expert to talk about the significance of tonight's primary.
And we are joined live with Professor Jeff Swartz of Thomas M. Cooley Law School to talk election results.
And one of the big words that we're hearing about this election is redistricting. What kind of impact do you think that's going to have on today's results?
Well, obviously, redistricting had a lot to do with a number of races. You have two former representatives running against each other. And both of them Democrats trying to hold on to a seat since their districts merged. I think redistricting has a lot to do with the congressional races and what's going to happen, especially in the Peter Meyer matter in the 3rd district. I'm just not sure that it's going to have a substantial effect on the outcome of any of the other races. I don't think it's going to matter in the gubernatorial race or in any other race. I think it's, again, politics are all local, and that's probably the reason why it'll stay that way.
And what are your thoughts on voter turnout this year?
Well, you know, primaries don't necessarily draw a lot of people. Always the turnout is very low. With the things that are happening right now and the push that's going on, I think there's a lot of things happening politically that are going to have an impact on the November race. I think you're going to see a rather sizable turnout for a midterm election in some areas. Some of the issues are really going to bring them out. I think we'll get an idea how the issues will impact turnout when we take a look at Kansas and we find out what happens with their particular constitutional amendment that's on the ballot regarding right to choose versus the anti-abortion process.
Now, you mentioned about redistricting and the larger races, but what impact will this have, tonight's results, for the general election in November?
Well, a lot of it has to do with, endorsements, where people are coming from. I think that the election deniers are going to have a hard time, whether they're Republicans or not, when we come into the fall. I think that there's a lot of independents and there are a lot of Republicans who are just tired of talking about 2020. And if that happens, it's going to be kind of disastrous for Republicans in this year's midterm election. I think that most Republicans want to move on. It's the people who don't want to move on that may drag down their possibilities of taking the House. I think that in the end, it's going to have a lot of effect on the Senate races. I think that I agree with 538. I think that the chances are Democrats are going to keep, at this point, are going to keep the Senate unless something drastic happens.
And how do you think Governor Whitmer will fare with the GOP winner?
Well, I was looking at the polls of her against all of the 5 people that were remaining in the Republican primary. She has about a 10 to 12 point edge on Tudor Dixon. I just don't know whether at this point, when I take a look at how the vote went in 2020 and how it went in 2016, when we're talking about the presidential race, the Republicans seems to always be, and this is the former president, always seem to be right in the 47.6, 47.8 percentage of the electorate in both of those elections. I don't know how much the Republicans can expand their voting, their turnout, as opposed to what the turnout will be for Democrats in the fall. And that will be a real deciding factor.
Well, Professor, let's talk about the 3rd Congressional District, which is getting national attention tonight. Peter Meijer, John Gibbs. What do you foresee for that? Is there a chance that Peter Meijer could lose?
Yeah, there is a chance he could lose. I think that it's going to depend upon the turnout for those who are farther to the right than Representative Meijer. Representative Meijer does have a lot of backing, both traditional Republicans and money, but he's not doing real well, obviously, with former President Trump. And I'm just not sure that former President Trump would have jumped into that race as heavily as he did if he didn't think he could swing the race over, as he's done in Tudor Dixon in the gubernatorial race. That's going to be a very close one. I think it's really going to depend upon what part of the Republican Party shows up at the polls.
And we just saw some preliminary numbers. That's just a few thousand votes. And right now, Gibbs is beating Meijer, but it's just with several thousand votes in. So,
and do you think
it kind of depends on who's voting and where they're voting from within the district. And I'd have to take a look at the maps and find out what part of what county is in at this point.
And do you think if Gibbs does win, that that's something that would make Democrats happy?
Yes, I do believe that that would make them happy. That's actually why they have put money into kind of propping Gibbs up, because Meijer is kind of a middle-of-the-road Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump, and that would ameliorate a Democratic challenge. Whereas we have an election denier and a very pro-Trump candidate in Gibbs. So the Democrats think that in an area like Grand Rapids, there's a real possibility of taking that seat.
And that would be Hillary Scholten will be the Democratic challenger, who I believe lost by 6 percentage points in the last election.
Yeah, against Meijer,
against Meijer.
Why that happened. I can understand why that happened, but I'm not sure that you had the same dynamics against Gibbs. It'll be interesting to see how the polls come out if Gibbs wins, of what the initial polls show.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Jeff Schwartz of Thomas M. Cooley Law School, for giving us your insights into tonight's election so far.
As you just heard, all eyes remain on that 3rd Congressional District seat. It had been a heated public race between Peter Meijer and John Gibbs. Here's a look at the current numbers right now. And again, there are only 5% of the votes being counted here, with 2,600 for John Gibbs and 1,500 for Peter Meijer. So a lot of votes to be counted yet.
13 on your side's Nate Bell joins us now live outside, where Meijer is closely watching this race with more details. Nate.
Yeah, Val, Juliet, we've actually inside of where Peter Meijer's watch party and his most are here joining him, watching those votes. Victory the last time that he won this race as well. Now, what we do want to talk about tonight is early on, but however, Gibbs is really pushing in his campaign as being the man in this race who is endorsed by the former president this race, the president.
And Nate, we're having some trouble with your audio, so we're going to come back to you a little bit later, but thank you for that update.
And now we are going to be heading out to Andrea Flores with an update on what she has.
Good evening, Val and Juliet. Well, the latest numbers in the U.S. House District GOP race against John Molinar and Thomas Norton, you can see that John Molinar has 62% of the vote, Thomas Norton 38%. Now that's just with 3% of precincts reporting, only a couple of thousand of votes in there. Now Representative Molinar represents the 4th Congressional District. Much of that district is now in the newly drawn 2nd District, so a lot of people in this area do already recognize Representative Molinar's name. This area stretches out to the lakeshore, and the newly drawn district gains Ionia County and communities like Mount Pleasant, Ludington, and Big Rapids. Representative Molinar has served 2 terms, originally elected in 2014, re-elected in 2018. Tom Norton, also on the ticket, the Kent County Army veteran and small business owner, has served in the Sand Lake Village politics, and he previously ran for the State House District in '73. So once again, with just 3% of precincts reporting, John Molinar leading with 62% of the vote, Tom Norton with 38%. But again, that's a small percentage of precincts reporting at this time. And people are trickling into the Kent County GOP headquarters for Representative Molinar's watch party. We will be joining them shortly to hear from Representative Molinar as the night progresses and we get more results in. Reporting live in Grand Rapids, Andrea Flores, 13 on your side.
And as Andrea was just pointing out with the maps, you could see the difference in the lines of the redistricting for the 2nd Congressional District.
Yes, you certainly can. It's going to be interesting to see those results, being that this is the first election with that happening, and so it's going to be an exciting night ahead for sure.
And everybody is still continuing to watch the Republican gubernatorial race as well. 5 candidates, and we have 3 of them are from West Michigan. Right now, Tudor Dixon is leading, and she did surge in the polls this last week.
Yes, that's correct. And we are now going to be joining Secretary of State Benson for what she has to say about this election night.
Anyone who arrived before that voter file was present at the precinct was verified as eligible to vote before they were provided ballots through the general application to vote process, and subsequent verification after the lists arrived of each individual who had previously participated confirmed that there was not a single person who was not eligible to cast a ballot who did so. In other words, we've been able to confirm that despite the challenges this morning in Inkster, that only eligible voters have cast their ballots, and will continue to be able to assure that throughout the post-election canvassing process.
Secretary, I know that it's still early, but I'm wondering if you've noticed, now that we're kind of 2 years into the pandemic, have there been any kind of trends that you're seeing maybe shift from maybe what we saw in 2020 in terms of just the voting habits of Michigan voters?
We have indeed seen Michigan voters embrace their option to vote from home. That's why you've seen over 1.1 million citizens vote absentee in this election, and 3.3 million citizens vote absentee in 2020. It seems even as the pandemic is in its waning stages, citizens are still choosing to vote from home, vote absentee, and as a result, we will continue to ensure that their right to do so will be protected and easily accessible for everyone.
In terms of, you brought up in the past just kind of the issues of election day kind of threats and kind of that activity. To your knowledge, have there been any arrests that are related to maybe election day interference?
There were a couple of things. For example, an unidentified backpack in one precinct that was quickly addressed and investigated. So there were some responses to things, and in every instance we saw that things were able to be swiftly addressed. In other words, there were no disturbances throughout the day, which I'm very grateful for. This was, as it was in 2020, a smooth election day that really is a result of so many election workers throughout the state embracing their role and doing their job with pride. I talked with election workers in Detroit, for example, today, and saw that really is a result of the increased scrutiny and attention of elections and election procedures. Poll workers have risen to the task to ensure that they've met the moment and they've really embraced their role and responsibility to protect the elections process. So it was actually quite inspiring to see us as an election community essentially become stronger as a result of a lot of the challenges we faced over the last few years, and I anticipate that strength will increase in the years ahead.
Now, speaking of those kind of Detroit election workers and maybe things that were going on here, in the past there have been issues with.
And we were just listening live to Secretary of State Benson in Detroit giving a press conference, an update on how election process was going so far. She had mentioned a little tiny hiccup in Inkster, but that had been corrected. And also the big news that she had was the fact that most people want to vote absentee, over 1 million ballots this year, not just because of the pandemic, but something that they really want to continue to do going forward.
And we want to talk about more of the Republican gubernatorial primary, that winner will run against Governor Gretchen Whitmer in the November 8th general election. We want to see if we have any updated numbers here, and we do. That's 8% versus 5%. And Val, we can summarize this right here.
Yes, we certainly can. Voters do not decide the candidates in the race for Attorney General and Secretary of State in the primary. They were chosen by each party. So in November, Republican Matthew DePerno will run against incumbent State Attorney General Dana Nessel.
And as you continue to look at these latest numbers, you can see there are the two candidates here, because as Val just mentioned, the party picks the candidate for Attorney General and Secretary of State. And these, once again, are the latest numbers with the Republican gubernatorial primary, 8%. Tudor Dixon continues to win by a pretty large margin, but still a lot of votes to be counted.
Yes, a lot left of the night to see those numbers changing. And you can count on 13 on your side for continuing coverage of tonight's primary. We have multiple crews with the candidates, and our team will be gathering those results as they come in. We will also have expert analysis looking forward to November.
You can also watch the results on our website, 13onyourside.com, or by downloading our free app. And be sure to join us for 13 on Your Side late night at 11 o'clock for the latest results and reaction on this primary election day.